Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start you off with, again, satellite data. I think this is just a great place to begin a forecast, is to get this bigger picture of how things are evolving. And as the sun is rising this morning, I'm watching a couple of things. There's a large complex of storms that moved out of Montana through the Dakotas into Nebraska and into Iowa in the overnight hours. And this is one that's got me quite concerned. It's held itself together pretty well. There's also a lingering frontal boundary sitting right in through this area here that we need to keep an eye on there. And I just got a new update here of some of the newest data. But if I take you back to yesterday, you can just see these storms kind of erupting in this area. And these were the kind of storms that were initializing the risk of this potential, bow echo event that was going to come through Iowa, maybe come through northern Illinois, and then hit Missouri and parts of Illinois later on today. So just to show you some localized radar data, this was the feature we were most concerned about. So if I take you back just a little bit here into the early morning hours, we had a squall line that started here, but this one clearly developed what we call a rear inflow jet. And that rear inflow jet is where the downdraft on the backside of the storm here descends quickly and then pushes out the nose of the storms right here. So you start to see them taking on a bowed shape. Anytime you see a shape like that on radar, a long squall line that's taken this kind of arcing shape, you know that there's strong back to front flow and damaging winds. And that's what we're concerned about. This is ripping right here along the Iowa-Nebraska border. There's isolated severe storms in parts of Iowa right now. And we've watched a lot of thunderstorm activity sit along this frontal boundary, stretching right into here, that it extended farther over toward like Ohio through Indiana. So this is kind of our main event early this morning here on the 12th. And the question is, how well does this maintain itself as it goes forward? Because it's had a history of producing a lot of severe weather. We're up to 139 reports from yesterday, including a lot of hail in Montana. But this is where this really started to take shape here with a very strong straight line winds. Now, it's not being captured yet on precipitation. And if you use my precipitation maps, which I want you to do, please do. Remember that even though you get a timestamp when I created the map at 6 a.m., these maps usually have about a 2-hour lag in the data. So you'll notice that the storms are already here, but it's not shown up yet. It takes time for them to process. But as you look at this, we can see a couple of other things, like the leftover rainfall from the low that went up the East Coast that did all of the damaging flooding here in parts of New England. You can also see the storm events that have sat down here over the last couple of days from Oklahoma all the way through the Gulf Coast and into South Carolina. But I think a lot of focus is going to be on what these storms end up doing later on today as they press into this part of the central United States. Now we'll get to the bigger picture things in just a few moments here, but I wanted just to kind of hone in on this. Storm Prediction Center just has a large area under a slight risk, and it's been a very challenging forecast to figure out what's going to happen inside of that corridor right here. I think I have better evidence what will happen north of it. I have better evidence what will happen to the west and south of it. But seeing how the storms, even early this morning, are going to come through this area has been quite a challenge. So I'm going to show you the latest data from the high-res NAM model starting off at 6 a.m. So the model is already got a little bit of an initialization problem. And what I mean by that is the storms are faster than what the model had suggested. The model said by 8 o'clock the squall line would be here with the leading line out ahead of it. And here it is just a little after 6 a.m. and that squall line has already made it much farther into Iowa and Nebraska. So this just happens. The models, it's difficult to try to pick this out and how it's going to go forward. So we're going to watch throughout the day today as that storm system through this morning presses all the way into northern Missouri. And the big question we have is, will it hold itself together beyond early afternoon? You see the models right now are breaking this apart temporarily, sending the other side of this storm system over to parts of Wisconsin, which desperately needs this rain, and over Chicago. And then as we play it forward, we see that into this evening, the second round along that boundary fires up in Missouri, over into parts of Illinois, Indiana, as the heavier rain moves through lower Michigan here on the northern side of this. So the models are then creating more isolated storm events that go through central Illinois, through most of Missouri, into Kansas, clipping Oklahoma, getting into Arkansas. That's the tricky part. I don't think we will have a model solution for what this is going to look like that will even resemble reality. We're going to have to just watch it on radar throughout the day today to see how it progresses. but I just can't get over the fact that this is already so much farther ahead than what the models were forecasting. So please just watch radar. Get a radar app on your phone, bring it up. I go to a College U page, so weather.cod.edu. I just go to their satellite radar and I pick off the regions, what I want to see, which is mosaic radar, and this is how I like to watch it. It gives me a big, broad view of what's going on. If you need a good app for your phone, my favorite one for radar is called Radar Scope. I know it has an expense with it, but if you need good radar data, that's the one that you should go with, Radar Scope. Okay, so we're keeping an eye on this, and just want to let you know, models not handling it very well. As we go into day 2, so this will be the 13th, again, we'll watch what's left of that boundary pressing into this area, but notice there's more risk of storms here. And just generally looking, where are the risk of storms? There's just a broad corridor that's in the midsection of the country, which we've been kind of painting for the last several days as to where we're expecting these storms to be. You get into the 14th, and now we start to realize where the ridge is, and we can see these ridge riding storms beginning to develop. And that's where I think we're going to watch, the pattern evolve over the coming days. Is where does the ridge rebuild? Where is it expected to migrate? And that's been the main narrative for us for the last several days. So this is what I've got. Newest WPC forecast showing precipitation over the next week. I just have to keep identifying the same corridor over which we're expecting to get the storms to cascade through. The models continue to be drier on this side of the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of the convection in the southeast will be isolated, but we do expect to see routine storms in through this area. So you're going to see a chance of precipitation nearly every single day in this area. The concern for where we've been drier and where it will likely stay drier just remains in the forecast here. Very limited chances of bringing in a lot of rain into that area. And the primary reason for this is its proximity to the low that's here over the Hudson Bay right now. So to show you all of this kind of stitched together, this is the low I'm talking about. So there's convergent drier flow here. You have your ridge that's right now rebuilding itself over Texas. So the flow is coming around the top like this. And that is what northwest summertime flow is. And this is where our most active thunderstorm corridor will sit. Now, we're going to watch this ridge of high pressure right here really open itself up and more than likely just continue to migrate to the west with time. But what I want to know is, will we continue to maintain a really well-defined low pressure center here over the Hudson Bay, somewhere over that part of Canada as this forecast evolves over the coming, honestly, days and weeks? So to do that, let's go back here. I want to show you what I've got right now from the European model, because it did make a significant change. It's going to be subtle, but it's actually significant as we play through this weekend, getting into early next week. Now, what I'm talking about is the maintenance of lower pressure in this area too. So this is the deep Hudson low we just mentioned, okay? Here's the ridge that was in Texas that opens up here into the southwest. But it'll be the maintenance of this low, which can be almost at the same time helped along by a downstream low here, that's going to be key in this pattern. Because into next week, going out there next Wednesday, Thursday, this was when I was worried that this ridge was going to open itself back up into a broader area in the midsection of the country. But with a low developing here, that's going to push the flow down farther to the south and likely make it bounce, pulling that ridge back farther to the west. This is actually all due to the advection of planetary vorticity. That's what this is. So as we play this out there to day 10, see what happened? Low here, low there, and the ridge backs itself up. Now what this does is this increases the length and duration of the heat that will be in the western United States. And out there past the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, this ridge in the newest model simulations, and the GFS echoes this, really becomes more pronounced up the western part of the United States. So you'll end up getting flow that comes over the top, and there's that northwest flow that's going to keep this whole area stormy going forward into this forecast. All right. So let's go have a look at it from the models. This is the European model this morning. Let me get one more. There we go. And playing through Thursday into Friday, getting into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday and Tuesday. I'm going to take you out a full week here. All we're trying to identify in this forecast is where the models just continue to toss those storms. So you can see them just streaking through this area. There will not be a model forecast that will verify perfectly. It just can't, because of the inability for the models to capture thunderstorm behavior. When we do a great job, I mean, it's amazing we can even show you this, but just understand If you're using your app or you're looking at even my website and saying, hey, I'm expecting to get this much rain, it's not going to verify. Let me show you some of the reasons for this. If we compare it to the GFS, ready? This is the GFS forecast out the same time period. So European model, GFS. Just look at the subtle differences in the way the models are trying to put down the precipitation. Same overall pattern, but you notice there are differences, and some of those differences are very pronounced. We've talked about this all week, like this little area right in through here, Nebraska into Missouri. The models have been very off on the precip in Missouri. They've been GFS significantly wetter than the European. Now you can look at any other region across the country. I've just identified that one region. In fact, I'm going to go into, here's what we'll do. My main website, agweather.com. I'm going to come over here and start typing in Springfield, and we'll pick Springfield, Missouri. We'll click submit on this. It'll go out and process your data. You click here to see your forecast, and there you go. So take a look at these temperatures in Springfield this week. Deep into the 90s today, but we cool back off to around 90 later. If you look at the precipitation forecast, that's the difference. 1.63 inches on the low end, 5.47 on the high end from the models. And if you slide down here, you can actually see that. So this is year-to-date precipitation for Springfield, but I want to click in right here on the ECMWF GFS NBM 10-day precip. And you'll get three graphics when you do this. The top one's the European, the next one is the GFS, and you can hover over it and see it, and the bottom one is the national blend of models. Now I make all three of the y-axes the same based off of the wettest model, which is the GFS. So if you notice, the European's at 2.26 over the next 10 days, the GFS is at 5.48. That's the difference right here. That's where the models are very different in the forecast. So that's what we're dealing with. And that's why I always take you back to these probability maps. Because if you want a weather forecast app or a model to pinpoint your precipitation, it's never going to happen. It just doesn't. It can't. We're not there. So we look at the chances, and what we've got here is the probability of an inch over the next 10 days, and it's that same corridor we keep discussing. So take a good look at this. Where it's increased in the probabilities is here, and down along the Gulf Coast and into New England. That's where the probabilities have been increasing over the last 24 hours of forecasting. So what about week 2? Well, this is going to be an interesting shift day to day in the forecast, because that ridge placement, if it does end up living here, it'll be drier in parts of Texas. But you look in this and see below, whenever we have big ridges built here, the mountains just produce storms. Now, does the rain from those storms get to the ground? In some cases, yes, but there's often a lot of lightning out of this. So I don't look at this and really I see heat more than I worry about drought in this area. Will there be ridge riders that kind of come over the top? I believe there will be. Will we be this dry in the upper Great Lake Basin? That is a risk, only because it's too close to the deeper lows that keep forming here. But the latest European model forecast went actually wetter in a lot of this area. Now, there's still a drier forecast in some places in here, but it still went wetter. And I don't think we fully understand where these storms are going to cascade over the top of this ridge as we go forward. So week 2, there's a lot of uncertainty at this point as well. What I feel more confident talking about is where the heat is going to be. So this morning at 6:05 when I was recording this, you can see here's our severe thunderstorm. These are the warnings. The color around it is the watches. But look at the excessive heat advisories, the excessive heat watches and warnings that are here and also in the western United States. That is where the ridge is going to be kind of living over the next several days. So if you look at those temperatures, here's Wednesday's highs. We might hit 100 in St. Louis, but barely get out of the 70s in Chicago. So about up to a 30-degree swing in temperatures here across the state of Illinois. You then come farther into the south, and the heat is on in Texas. Now watch it build into parts of California. There's Thursday. Here we go to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now Sunday's the day I'm watching most carefully for possibly the highest heat. We will likely have part of the Mojave Desert, including Death Valley, get up there in the mid-120s, maybe approaching 130 Fahrenheit. Phoenix 117, the entire Central Valley of California over 110, and even up here into the Columbia Basin, deep into the 90s, probably cracking 100. As we just play this out there into early next week, we continue to see that cooler weather here and much warmer weather there. Now, I got kind of interested today just to look at this, so I pulled up a map of California, and I wanted to zoom down in here and just have a look, down into Southern California. So I went down here on I-10, and I do have this town here called Desert Center. That's all that it is. This is here in the Mojave Desert Center. It's actually in my database. So I've come back to my site, Desert Center. There it is. It is the 23,366 largest city in the country. It's tiny. And we click on submit, and we're going to go get a forecast for Desert Center. All right, let's shrink that up a little bit. They're projected on Sunday to be 121. And if you're curious what it's like to live in the desert, they've had 1.3 inches of rain so far this year, but their typical annual total is somewhere around 3.5 inches of rain. And that's where they sit right there. So incredibly hot. Their year-to-date temperatures, though, take a look. It's only been recently that they've really cranked up in these temperatures. Much of this year in California has been cooler. And I just got to look. The 7-day multi-model temperatures. Look at that. Just lows 85, highs the next day 110. There are sometimes the desert have a 40-degree swing in temperatures every day. It's amazing. Okay. What about the temperatures beyond that? I'm going to slide you out here today 5 through 10. That tells me the ridge opening up in this area. The depth of the trough here, you can see just an incredible amount of contrast. That's the contrast we've been waiting on all year to drive the storms into this direction. So what about day 5 through 10, then 10 to 15? The newest model simulations have backed off on the extent of the heat here. Do you remember earlier in the week we saw the warmth getting into this area? The newest runs are not doing that. They're keeping it really very much in the western United States now. Now, this will flip-flop a lot in the next couple of days, but we need to remember that the risk of the most excessive heat will be confined to this part of the Four Corners states and surrounding areas. It will stretch along the Gulf Coast in this pattern as well. Now, speaking of the Gulf Coast, I went out and I was looking here a bit at ocean temperatures. And I wanted to show you one of my favorite websites. Go to it. Levi built a beautiful website here, Tropical Tidbits. You can see El Nino continuing to grow. We talk about that in our in-depth reports. But I wanted to show you the ocean temperatures based off of the CDAS data off of Florida, because he put a nice grid of numbers over the top of this. And remember, 30 degrees Celsius is 86, 32 is 90. And I was just telling a friend last night, I said, the waters down here around the southern tip of Florida toward like the Bahamas, the waters down here they're like 10 degrees, 12 degrees cooler than a hot tub. We keep hot tubs at about 101 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're only allowed to stay in those for about, 15 minutes? The water down here is just about 10 to 12 degrees cooler than that right now. And this is very concerning for the hurricane season coming up. But right now, there's nothing coming off of Africa that I'm overly worried about. In fact, the only thing I see coming off of Africa to discuss is there's quite a bit of dust in the air. And the forecast right now for the next 10 days or so is to spread that dust across the Atlantic. Sometimes this dust, though, is indicative of an active start to the monsoonal season in the Sahel and south of it into the rainforest. So we need to watch this carefully going throughout the rest of July into August, because as soon as this hurricane season gets going, there's a lot of warm water here to use. Now, when you have dust blowing across the Atlantic and coming over the Caribbean and into the southeast United States, I did look up the mineral content of this, and there's a lot of feldspar in it. So it's not like it's doing anything good in terms of putting that down on our southeast, but it does start to impact the air quality. And since we're talking about air quality, the sun is trying to rise this morning here over parts of Alberta and British Columbia. But yesterday at sunset, again, look at the wildfires that still are ongoing here in parts of British Columbia. And that's where we have our main air quality issues for North America coming from. The smoke continues to get pulled into systems rolling around here, deep lows over the Hudson Bay, so it means it gets pulled into the northern tier of the United States. But the air quality throughout much of British Columbia and Alberta is still quite terrible. So I'll leave you there, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow morning. Thanks.